Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Our guest today is Ryan Craig, Managing Director at Achieve Partners and former Managing Director at University Ventures. Ryan has been associated with higher ed for many years, including having advised the U.S. Department of Education and having served as VP of Strategic Development for Fathom, Columbia University's online education company. Ryan's a frequent guest columnist at Forbes, Inside Higher Ed, Fortune, and many others. He's a big proponent of apprenticeships, and he joins us today to talk about how they have the potential to change the higher ed business model. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Drumm, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Looking forward to this conversation. You do a lot of writing for Forbes, and one of your last articles had to do with faculty burnout. But it went beyond faculty burnout. It went to what's wrong with higher ed and how we need to fix it.
Yeah, most of what I write ends up there one way or the other, no matter where I start. Look, I mean, I think the point of that article was that I've been reading all these articles about faculty who were burned out. And really it was, the point of it was, you've never had it so good, and you probably won't. Again, because colleges and universities have still done a remarkable job of remaining walled off from market forces in lots of ways. So lots of people are probably better off to claiming burnout than faculty, more credibly. But look, I think the fundamental challenge is that the economy has moved and changed dramatically over the last generation, and higher education has moved incrementally. And I expect that to change. It's going to snap back, and the change in higher education over the next decade, I expect to be pretty dramatic.
Well, I think you're right. With all the dollars that got poured into higher education because of COVID, I think we kept an awful lot of institutions afloat that probably shouldn't be.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, you just need to look at the enrollment over the last couple of years. I think it's community colleges are down 15, 20%. Non-selective four-year college and universities, I think maybe are down 5 to 10%. So it's significant. Students recognize that the debt they're taking on is real, even though it's now just $10,000 has been forgiven or is likely to be forgiven from that, and that they need to get a return in that investment. And so, the single biggest change in higher education over the past generation is that generation ago, if you'd asked students why they were enrolling, you would have gotten a whole host of different responses. Today, if you ask student, 90+% will say, it's to get a good job for my career. So they are thinking about it in numerical terms. Lots of faculty don't like that, but then again, those faculty already have good jobs. So students know that they need to generate a return on the debt that they're accumulating over 4, 5, 6, or if you're getting a graduate degree, maybe a decade of investment in tuition and fees and cost of living. It adds up. And the big problem that we have is that while the economy has moved, higher education hasn't in terms of the programs they offer, the products they offer. North of 40% of new graduates are underemployed in jobs. They're unable to access the good jobs they thought they were investing in themselves to get.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I just did a podcast with a couple of folks from the Georgetown Center for Education.
Sure.
And they came out with that same thing. It's taking graduates into their 30s to get a good paying job, whereas with my generation, boomers and even millennials, it was earlier, it was mid-20s to late 20s.
Well, the way I think of it is that, a generation ago, it was kind of harder to define the skills that made someone successful at an entry-level job, right? So think about Mad Men or LA Law, right? Depending on sort of when you grew up, right? 60s or the 80s, right? What made someone successful in that kind of office environment? It's kind of, hard to say, right? A bachelor's degree it's probably a good indication that someone has reasonable problem solving, communication, executive function skills, reasonable level of persistence. They obviously did something hard over a 4-year period, get along with people. So bachelor's degree is a pretty good signal that someone's going to be successful in that environment. That's exactly what happened, right? You get hired into that kind of environment, right out of college with a bachelor's degree. And whatever you needed to learn, they kind of teach you. Now in our more impatient economic environment and a digital economic environment, and one where hiring is all done digitally, and there are thousands of resumes submitted for every good open job, skills, very specific digital and business skills and experience are specified for even, jobs that were, a decade ago, clearly entry-level jobs. And that makes it much harder for new college graduates to get those jobs without the benefit of those skills and experience. That's why you have the problem of not getting a good job until you're, in your 30s.
Yeah. Well, there's other things too. The economy has changed significantly. It's all digitally based. The universities are not really looking outside of themselves to create courses. I mean, some do, but the vast majority, it's more navel gazing than anything else, is it not?
Well, they're not willing to, they're not really interested in adopting industry recognized certifications. They'd rather create their own version of it because, of course, we can do it better. The problem is that employers have no idea what your certificate is. They do know what the PMP, project management certification is, because they use that, and they have, hundreds or thousands of employees who have that. So yeah, it's hard. I think it's very hard for colleges and universities to transition to a skills-based hiring model, but that's exactly what employers are seeking. Skills, but also experience as well, which kind of just turns lots of entry-level jobs into oxymorons because they're obviously not entry-level. The study a few years back showed that your typical entry-level cybersecurity job, given the certifications and skills that they're asking for, it's effectively looking for 3 years of experience with cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. So how do you get those? How do you get those jobs? Well, we have answers, but I'm not sure universities, your typical university has answers to that question.
Yeah, it becomes very difficult, and it's also very expensive to do a 4-year degree nowadays. And, it's adding to the debt, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's when you add the spiraling cost of living and rent and food and board, if, you're doing one of these, you're doing a degree program, you're not able to work full time by definition. So at most you can work part-time. You're probably not working part-time in a, high paying job. In all likelihood, you're probably making close to minimum wage by doing that. Time was, when you and I went to school, you could probably support your cost of living through that work. You can't do that anymore. It's really not possible, let alone tuition and fees. Again, if everyone graduated into a $60,000 a year salary job, it would all be fine. The problem is that costs have gone up, tuition has gone up, and employability has gone down. And it's gone down because what employers are looking for has changed, has moved, and higher education is not the most nimble institution in America.
Yeah, it certainly isn't. And the cost of the education has gone up significantly. You alluded to all the other things, 60 to 80% of all costs are things other than tuition, but the cost at the university has gotten to be more.
And universities have been in an amenities race. They've been in an administrative race. They feel a need to have a dean of, you name it, to address the issues and concerns that enrolled students may have. And so you have bloat in terms of facilities, bloat in terms of administration. Actually, spending on faculty has not increased. Spending on actually instruction in the classroom, that hasn't increased dramatically. But everything else that the university does has increased. That's resulted in tuition that over the past generation has been double the rate of inflation, and fees have gone up even faster than that.
Yeah. Well, you've got a lot of people who would argue that education is a public good and the government, the states, should be paying for it. At the same time, many states, if I should say most states,
Yeah.
have decreased the amount of public support for education.
Well, I think that part of that has to be a sense that traditional higher education institutions aren't delivering what the economy needs, right? I think that if they were doing a better job of that, you might not have seen such a decline in state support. But there's no question that declining state public funding has exacerbated the tuition and student debt issue for sure.
Yeah. So what can be done to change this? Well,
I actually think that most institutions are probably not going to change their practices and develop, new, and the title of my last book, Faster and Cheaper Alternatives to Good Jobs, unless and until they're enrollment craters. And they have no choice but to do it. It's extraordinarily hard. Look, change is hard for anyone. Change at an academic institution, particularly dramatic change, where we're saying you need to rid yourself of this, bundled thinking around the only thing you sell is a 4+ year product that's going to cost $100,000 or $200,000, and you can, divide that up into much smaller, faster, cheaper products that will they're skill based and help students get from point A to point B much faster. But guess what? Instead of enrolling 1,000 a year, you're going to have to enroll, 5,000 a year every year in order to keep up. That's not something that your typical university is going to opt for unless they have to. So my view is what's needed is to affect that change is enough supply of alternative pathways to economic opportunity and socioeconomic mobility that the college and university will have no choice but to change. And really, the reason that we keep piling more and more money into accredited post-secondary institutions is primarily, in my view, because there aren't clear alternatives to those pathways. And so, my last book was really about the sort of what we call last mile training or boot camp model that we were seeing. I've now become convinced that apprenticeship is the answer. It's the only equitable answer, because if you're learning a valued skill, you should be paid to do it. An apprenticeship is a job where you're being paid a living wage while you're learning. And what's really needed is an explosion in the supply of apprenticeship programs in the U.S. My goal and the goal of this nonprofit organization I helped to found called Apprenticeships for America is that we want as many large-scale apprenticeship programs, hiring 1,000 apprentices a year or more, as we have college and universities. So if you can imagine 4,000 colleges and universities, 4,000 large apprenticeship programs, hiring thousands of young workers across every industry in America, where you're not hiring them based on experience or skill or credentials. You're hiring them based on interest, aptitude, potential, and you're training them on the job as they go. And these apprenticeships lead to jobs that yield multiple exciting career paths. That would, in my view, be a game changer in terms of socioeconomic mobility and address many, if not most, of the economic, social, maybe even political challenges that we faced as a country. I think a lot of it is due to the fact that a good portion of the country, urban, rural, underrepresented minority, conservative, Republican, you name it, feels shut out of economic opportunity. They don't feel like the good digital jobs of the future are within their reach, because they're told that they need to enroll in a program that will take 4+ years and cost them 6 figures to do it. And that's not realistic for most people, where life gets in the way and they simply can't afford it.
Yeah. So what do you say about the coding boot camps? Isn't that similar to what you're talking about?
Yeah, I do. I think the position I've come to on that is that if you're seeking to be upskilled in an area where there's a clear talent gap, where there's a clear gap between the number of workers that employers are looking for and the number of available workers, and someone is asking you to pay tuition or take any financial risk whatsoever for that upskilling, then that organization, that school, either has a bad business model or an unimaginative one, because there's a very willing payor for that upskilling, and that's the end employer who can't find the talent. So we are no longer investing in tuition-based models. We are investing only in employer pay models, where the employers who can't find the talent are going to eventually pay for that upskilling.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because I just read an article. Many people are saying that the coding boot camps and some of the other boot camps that have come out have not met their potential.
They have not. I actually have an article coming on that next week. In my last book, Faster and Cheaper Alternatives, was sort of the future belongs to boot camps type argument, but that hasn't happened. I think that, alternative credentials have continued to grow, but they've continued to grow because those who already have good jobs and can sort of dilly and dally with, various digital credentials are trying them. But if you're a 19-year-old from the Bronx, or you're a 30-year-old Amazon warehouse worker in Racine, Wisconsin, you don't have the luxury of monkeying around with some new credential that no one's ever heard of before. So my view is these new credentials, bootcamp or digital credentials, they need to be stapled to something solid. And that something solid could be a degree, although the solidity of degrees is sort of in question, given everything we've just discussed, or stapled to a job, which is really an apprenticeship or a training program where there's just a very clear pathway to work. So I use as an example this company, Medical Sales College, which is a boot camp that trains medical device sales people. So people selling medical devices to doctors, orthopedic medical devices. So very specific technical training. And the way that they get most of their enrollments is they show them this recruitment platform that they've developed called Zero Fee Recruiting, which is only for medical sales college graduates. And they have 3,000 hiring managers looking at the platform every month, looking for medical sales college graduates. And that's the sort of thing that I think is pretty convincing to students who are then contemplating whether to pay tuition or take a financial risk on this new credential that they probably hadn't heard of the month before.
And how many people are graduating from those programs and actually landing a good job?
Well, that program, I think it's 90+% or getting a sort of sales job in the medical device industry. I think it's different. I think that different programs, I think train and pray is, the days of train and pray are numbered, which is effectively what traditional higher education is. We kind of, in higher education, it's even worse. It's train on whatever faculty think they want, or what they want to teach, and then pray, which works for selective institutions because the caliber of student inputs is so high, but at a non-selective institution doesn't work too well anymore. Mm-hmm. So look, a boot camp that does what Medical Sales College does and is, really active and innovative in terms of cultivating an ecosystem of hiring employers and building a platform for them. I think there's definitely a place in the ecosystem for that kind of tuition-based model. But other than that, we're focused on apprenticeship. And specifically what we're doing is our firm, we are buying business services companies that operate in skill gap sectors like Salesforce, cybersecurity, Workday, healthcare IT. So these are companies that perform services in those sectors. And then we're building large-scale apprenticeship programs into those companies so they become talent engines for their industry. They're selling new talent to clients, to partners, to competitors in the sector because there just simply aren't enough. There aren't any pathways in some of these sectors for new young people to get in, get the skills, get the certification, and get the work experience they need to address the talent shortage in those sectors.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say about programs like what Arizona State has and Michael Crow? He's talking about lifelong learning. Come back to ASU. We can help you once you've had your degree. We can help you get to that next level through selected courses, et cetera.
Look, I think that if you already have a good first job, those are the kinds of, those are the people who they can afford to experiment in terms of what additional credentials might want. They could go get a, executive MBA, for example, or they could take a short certification or credential of some kind that no one's ever heard of. And hopefully it helps them in their career, but it's not a make or break because they're already in the job. So I think that he's absolutely right about that. I think that, for those who don't already have a good first job, so that's both the 19-year-old from the Bronx and the 30-year-old from Wisconsin who works at Amazon, that's not what they need. What they need is a structured pathway that leads to a good job, if not a job with training built in, namely an apprenticeship program.
Well, with something like that, you have stackable certificates, which, they could be used to lead to a degree. But what I'm hearing you say is really the degree, for the most part, should not be valid anymore.
Well, I think it's a macro, the degree was a macro credential that, as I said, back in the days of Mad Men or LA Law, provided the signals that employers felt were fairly reliable in terms of indicating, this person is going to be an effective entry-level worker. I don't think that most employers think that anymore. And certainly the labor market data seems to support that. Most employers are looking for a lot more than a bachelor's degree. And in some cases, they've eliminated a bachelor's degree requirements. Lots of companies are doing that. IBM, Accenture, Deloitte are eliminating bachelor's degree requirements in job descriptions. In fact, there's a new national campaign that just launched this week called Tear the Paper Ceiling, which is essentially trying to shame large employers from having degree requirements in job descriptions because it's keeping out 60% of the population from those jobs. So we're a firm believer that those who are skilled through alternative routes, STARS, should be able to access these jobs. The problem is that the easiest way for an employer to hire a STAR would be to use some assessment at the top of the hiring funnel, right? Test them on the skills that are required for that job. Unfortunately, that's potentially illegal because per labor law, if any assessment that you use in the hiring process results in an adverse impact on any protected group, meaning that you'll see a 20% variance in the hiring rate for that group, you'll be subject to an EEOC action. So in my view, the best way to accomplish the shift from degree and pedigree-based hiring to skills-based hiring is actually what I call try before you buy, which is not an assessment, but essentially a tryout. That's what hackathons are, for example. You're looking for software developers, you recruit them at a hackathon. That's what internships are, and that's what apprenticeships are, for sure.
Yeah.
We expect to see big growth in that area.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't surprise me if you do see some growth, but I do not see mainstream moving away from degrees, except in certain areas. I mean, the state of Maryland has done that.
Yep.
With certain things you can, but client interface, having the emotional intelligence skills.
Why can't you assess that in the hiring process? Right. The real problem is you are assessing it through the interview process. The real question is the top of the hiring funnel, right? If you have 1,000 resumes for a given entry-level job, right? The question is which 30 you can actually talk to. Mm-hmm. Of the 30 you talk to, I guarantee you're not focused on whether they have a degree, whether they don't have a degree. That's going to become apparent in the interview, whether they have sufficient communication skills, problem-solving skills, critical thinking skills, and so forth. So it's really a question of that first sort at the top of the hiring funnel. Are there other ways to sort the 1,000 into the 30 to figure out which 30 you should be talking to and not use degrees? And a bunch of us think there are.
That's got way more skills in it than I'm capable of developing. So
yeah, no, look, but I think there are companies who are saying IBM is, I think something like fewer than 40% of its jobs now in the US have degree requirements on them. So,
but I think that depends on the kind of job it is. If it's a coding, if it's a software development, yes, there are other ways besides degrees to get that. But
what about sales? What about sales jobs?
I would say most people who do not have a college education have not developed the social skills or the emotional intelligence to be able to function on a very high level in sales.
I think lots of college educated people fall into that category as well.
Well, I would agree with you on that. But, if I go to AAC&U's latest survey,
right,
that's one of those things that it's like, okay, the ability to work in teams. How do you get that?
Yep.
How do you learn to think critically? How do you learn to analyze, interpret data? Those are all things that should be built into a college curriculum or whatever you're doing.
I think that somebody who's worked at the Gap for 4 years, as opposed to going to UT El Paso, is going to have some of those skills, maybe not all of them, but some of them for sure. So it's not a question of, we're not talking about equating a new high school graduate with someone who's 24 and has just completed a bachelor's degree. I think you need to look at, two 24-year-olds, one of whom maybe spent 6 years attending classes at UT El Paso, and the other one who worked for 6 years, and actually see what of those skills are different. I have no question the writing is going to be better for the college student. You're going to probably have a sort of finer critical thinking, problem-solving skills, but there are going to be other skills, soft skills perhaps, where the individual who's worked for 4, 5, or 6 years may be ahead of the college students. So again, we're fans of the idea of these skilled through alternative routes. We think that degree requirements and job descriptions are structurally racist, because you have, if you just simply look at the percentage of Americans working adults who've completed bachelor's degrees, it's like 40% white, under 20% Black and Hispanic. So it's problematic. I just think there are other ways to ascertain whether somebody can do a job than look at whether they have a piece of paper or not.
I think you're right in many respects, and we can agree to disagree on some others.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So Ryan, we're coming to the end of our time, which it always happens. 3 takeaways for university presidents.
Look, I think it's a challenging environment out there for sure. Employability needs to be at the heart of what you're focused. Unless you happen to be president of Harvard or Yale, your employability needs to be what you're focused on. And so really think about the academic programs you're offering. And even if you're not ready to sort of move away from the bundled degree model, you can do things like, for example, turn your degree programs upside down and begin to start them with industry recognized certifications, so that the 30, 40, 50% of students who don't make it past a year or two in the program are still leaving with a recognized valued credential. You should do things like integrate experiential learning into your academic programs. So platforms like Ripen, RIIPEN, for example, are good ways for you to try to simulate what Northeastern has built with their global co-op program. Now there are online marketplaces that essentially you don't have to build that infrastructure, build all those employer relationships. Those employers are already on these platforms, and you can find them and find the real world work projects and allow faculty to integrate them into courses as capstone projects, which is really useful. And then think about career services. Career services is, I think, a fundamentally flawed concept, because by dint of having it allows everyone else on campus who interacts with students, every faculty member, every administrator, to point to career services and say that's their responsibility. Career services needs to be integrated into the core of what institutions do. In fact, I think career services should be abolished, and faculty and administrators should be on the front line for helping students navigate, think about, and find and network to get good first jobs. And once they graduate, that's the province of alumni services. So divide it up. They don't need a separate office for career services. That's really what the whole institution should be focused on.
That certainly helps take care of too many deans.
Yeah, that helps with the deans for sure.
So Ryan, what's next for you?
So I have a new book coming out next year called Apprentice Nation: Why an America of Apprentices Will Be a Stronger, Fairer Country, and How We Get There. So I'm just actually finishing it up in the next month, and excited for that. I do think that the next few years is going to be really exciting for the field of apprenticeship, and really helping take apprenticeship out of, it's kind of in a ghetto right now of, being viewed as for the construction trades only. I think everyone should start their career with an apprenticeship, and that will help address a lot of the problems we've been talking about.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. It's a fascinating conversation, and wish you all the best of luck with the new book.
Thanks, Drumm. Great speaking with you.
You too. Thanks for listening today, and a special thank you to our guest, Ryan Craig, for sharing his thoughts on how apprenticeships can change the higher ed business model. Our next guest is Phil Hill, publisher of the Phil on EdTech blog and partner at MindWires LLC. Phil will be joining us to talk about the state of the EdTech market, including OPMs, where it's going, and what university presidents need to know to take advantage of current market forces.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode, at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, Please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.